How did middle-aged women manage to keep their bed clean while on their period? The wind sighs through the wooden shutters like an old woman remembering. In the corner of a stone chamber, a single candle flickers beside a narrow bed. Its golden flame paints long shadows on the cold gray walls, dancing over dried herbs, a wooden wash basin, and a bundle of cloth wrapped in twine. She lies still, her eyes wide open, not from fear, nor from dreams, but from the familiar discomfort of a body bound by time, by silence, by things she cannot name aloud. It is the year of our Lord, 1372. She is 36, a mother of 4, a wife of 1, and for the 23rd time since the harvest moon, she finds herself once again lying awake, clutching her belly, feeling the slow and secret rhythm of blood moving through her quiet as breath, steady as guilt. There is no glass in the window, only oiled parchment stretched across a crooked frame, letting in the chill of a spring night too long delayed. Outside, the village sleeps beneath a blanket of dark. Somewhere in the distance, a hound barks once, then goes quiet. All is still, except for her. The mattress beneath her is stuffed with straw. Coarse linen sheets washed and dried by her own hands cover it thinly. Between her thighs, she has tied a length of wool cloth, stiff from ash soap, dyed dark to hide the stains. It itches terribly, but that too she is used to. She shifts her weight ever so slightly, careful not to disturb the cloth she placed beneath her Hipsan old smock torn into a pad, layered with dried moss and stitched together with trembling fingers. She remembers when her mother showed her how to make it. "You mustn't bleed onto the mattress," the old woman had whispered, eyes darting toward the church bell tower. "Men think it's a curse. Some say it's the devil leaving your body. You stain the bed, and you'll bring misfortune to the house." No one told her what to do with the pain, though. The dull ache in her back, the weight in her thighs, the cramps that felt like the earth itself folding inward. She had learned, over years of silence, how to bear it, with her breath, with her patience, with layers of fabric and prayers whispered into the dark. The candle pops. The flame gutters low, then brightens. She watches it with a strange tenderness, a small light in an old world, unsteady, but not yet gone. No one speaks of this knot in the village square, not over spinning wheels, not even between sisters. They speak of childbirth, of fevers, of husbands, and lost grain. But not this. This is a woman's burden, folded and hidden like so many other truths, wrapped in blood-soaked linen and tucked beneath the hearth, washed in secret when no one is watching, hung to dry behind the stables, where only the cows might see. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening to her own heartbeat. In a few days it will pass. The blood will slow, then stop. She will scrub the cloths in a basin of cold water, rubbing in ashes until the stains fade. She will hang them to dry in the shade, then pack them away with lavender to cover the scent. And no one will ever know, not her husband, not the priest, not even her daughters, not yet. But one day she will call her eldest into the candlelight. She will sit her down beside the bed, and she will say, as her mother once did, "You mustn't bleed onto the mattress." Outside, the wind grows stronger. Inside, she turns onto her side and pulls the wool blanket up to her chin. The candle burns low, its wax pooling at the base like time itself. And though sleep will come slowly, she is not afraid. She is not alone. Not in this, not in the darkness, not in the 1,000-year-long silence shared by all the women who came before her and all who will follow. They never spoke of it, not in the daylight, not over stew, not even in the hush of candlelight, not unless they had to. And even then, it was with lowered voices and glances over the shoulders, though the walls themselves might listen, as though the air might carry the words to the wrong ears. In the eyes of the church, a bleeding woman was not merely inconvenient. She was unclean, unholy, touched, perhaps, by Eve's ancient curse. They said her body was a reminder of sin, that with each drop of blood, she echoed the first disobedience in the garden. A woman on her courses could not take communion. She could not enter the church. In some corners of the Christian world, she was forbidden even to touch holy objects. A chalice, a crucifix, a Bible. Her hands, it was said, might defile them, as if blood could stain the divine. And so the silence began. Girls were warned, not taught. They bled in secret, hid their cloths in the dark corners of cupboards, and prayed the stains would not show. Even their mothers whispered the truth, as if to name it aloud might invite something worse, something watching, something waiting. In some villages, there were customs to protect the home from a menstruating woman. She was not to bake bread. She was not to churn butter. She was not to walk through a vineyard, lest the wine go sour. And if a man fell ill while she bled beneath the same roof well, wasn't that explanation enough? The silence was not only religious, it was practical, it was survival. To speak of blood was to invite judgment. To stain the bed was to risk shame. To be seen drying cloths with red marks might mean being labeled a witch, or worse. A woman with knowledge of her own body. And knowledge, well, that was a dangerous thing to have. Still, the blood came. It came like a tide, a reminder, a ritual. Every month, without fail, uninvited but never unexpected. Some saw it as punishment, others as proof that they had not yet conceived. There were women who waited anxiously for the blood, and women who wept when it came. There were women who prayed for it to stop, and those who feared what would happen when it finally did. Because when it stopped, truly stopped, you were no longer young, no longer fertile, no longer useful. Men rarely knew the full truth of it. They saw the cloths being scrubbed and turned away. They heard the muttered excuses and did not ask. They were told, if anything, that it was woman's business, and so they left it there. At the edge of the firelight, in the soft shadows of the female world. But among women especially, the older ones, there was a quiet understanding, a nod exchanged at the washing line, a shared pot of thyme water, a pinch of ground sage folded into a cloth pouch, handed off without words. Even silence has its language. And though they never said the word, never spoke of blood in full voice, they made space for each other. There were tales, of course, whispers, of girls who bled too long and were taken by spirits, of women whose cloths went missing and turned up at a witch's door, of herbal cures that could stop the blood if taken at the right hour, beneath the right moon. But no one ever wrote these things down. They weren't meant to be written. They were passed from hand to hand, breath to breath, like secrets or spells. You might hear one in a market stall, or behind a locked door in a convent, or on your wedding night, from a sister who took your hand and said, "Be still, it will pass." Not all women were afraid. Some learned to read the rhythms of their bodies like the seasons. Some knew which herbs eased the pain. Some kept little ledgers in their minds, counting days and watching the moon. They did not speak, but they understood. Because in the end, silence does not mean ignorance. It does not mean shame. It simply means that knowledge had to be hidden, and yet it endured. Passed from mother to daughter, from midwife to maiden, from widow to bride, folded into cloth, soaked in ash water, dried behind barn doors and buried in lavender. It lived on in those quiet rituals, in the care taken with bedsheets, in the weight of wool between the legs. A whole history, unwritten but not forgotten. And in that silence there was resilience. In a world without zippers, without elastic bands, without mass-produced anything, getting dressed was not a simple affair. It was a ritual, a preparation, a quiet armoring for the day. And for a medieval woman, especially one bleeding each layer of cloth, was not just a shield from cold, but from shame. Let us begin with the skin. She wakes before dawn, the embers in the hearth long since gone to ash. The stone floor is cold beneath her bare feet. Her fingers are stiff, but she moves with practiced ease, reaching for the garments folded at the foot of her bed. The first is her chemisea long linen shift, simple and pale, worn directly against the skin. It's coarse by modern standards, but for her it is familiar, comforting even. She checks the inner hem, where a hidden tuck conceals a strip of wool, just in case. Just for today. Because she is bleeding, the cloth she used overnight now bundled carefully in a piece of gray wool will be rinsed before breakfast. But she must prepare for the rest of the day, and that means dressing for discretion and protection. She pulls the chemise over her head, shaking it down to her ankles. The linen falls like a sigh. But beneath it, between her thighs, she needs more. Much more. In modern language, we might call it a pad. But for her, it is simply the cloth. Worn, washed, reused, and patched again. It's made of wooler, sometimes linen, if she's fortunate enough to keep some scraps from an old smock. It's folded thickly, several layers, sometimes with dried moss or soft straw sandwiched in between. Some women sew them into a pocket of cloth. Others simply fold and hope. To keep it in place, she uses a menstrual belt, though she would never call it that. It is a strip of leather or twisted rope or thick fabric, tied tightly around the waist or hips. From it hang two more taizone, front, one back. The cloth is secured between them, strung like a hammock beneath her body. It holds. Usually, if she moves carefully, if she avoids sudden steps, if she doesn't lift anything too heavy. But of course, she will. She will fetch water. She will tend the fire. She will knead dough and lift children and crouch in the garden. And the cloth may shift, and she will feel it every moment. Once the underlayers are in place, she adds her curtlia-fitted woolen gown, laced at the sides or back, depending on the region and the wealth. It is snug, supportive, practical, a bodice stiff enough to act as early shapewear, though she does not think of it that way. If she is going out, she will add a surkawata, sleeveless overdress, worn for modesty and warmth. If she is working, she may tie a linen apron over it all, the strings digging into her lower back. She ties them anyway. It gives her something to press against when the cramps come. Around her legs, if it is cold, she wears hose woolen stockings held up by garters. These are not attached like modern tights, but separate sleeves for the legs. And they, too, must be kept clean, because blood has a way of moving. Some women cut strips of cloth to stuff inside their hose. Others layer skirts so thickly that the lower hem becomes a final defense against seepage. No matter the method, she checks and adjusts, often ducking into the corner behind the stables or slipping briefly into the woods. Privacy is scarce, but necessity teaches ingenuity, and always, at the back of her mind, is the bed. She thinks about the bed more often during these days. Whether the cloth she slept on is stained, whether her husband noticed, whether the smell will linger, because while she can replace a chemise, a kirtle, even a belta-stained mattress is harder to hide, and harder still to explain. Wealth makes a difference. A lady of the manor might have multiple sets of linen. She might have a chambermaid to wash her cloths, a servant to heat water, a trunk of clean garments to choose from. Her menstrual cloths may be made of fine wool or imported linen, embroidered even still hidden, but beautiful. She may spend her bleeding days in bed, reading scripture or resting in a sunlit room. But the peasant woman has no such luxury. Her only linen shift is patched at the shoulders. Her menstrual cloths are made from torn pillowcases or the worn edges of an old apron. She cannot rest. She cannot pause. The fields will not wait, and neither will the chickens. Still, they both bleed, and they both manage. There are quiet ways of sharing advice. A look across the hearth, a murmured recommendation for moss gathered from a certain tree, a warning against using straw. It scratches. Some midwives suggest soaking cloths in vinegar before use. Others steep comfrey root in hot water and soak the fabric in it to soothe irritation. Some women, particularly in warmer regions, even use sponges, natural sea sponges, soft and pliable, cut to fit. But these are rare and often passed down like relics. The belt, though crude, is effective. Until it slips, until the cloth bunches, until a red line trickles where it shouldn't. She feels it before she sees it. She always does. And when it happens, she hurries to the washing place, clutching her side as if the pain were some injury she could disguise. She rinses the cloths with cold water and ash soap. She wrings them out behind a tree. She hopes no one sees, because the stain is not just red. It is social. It is spiritual. It is shame. And yet beneath it all there is resilience. Each fold of fabric is a choice. Each belt looped around her hips is an act of care. Each layer pulled over her shoulders is a fold, silent assertion. I will carry this, and I will go on. She does not speak of it, but she endures it. And in that quiet endurance, there is a kind of dignity the world does not see. But we can. We can imagine the cool linen on her skin, the rough edge of wool between her legs, the way she adjusts her steps to avoid shifting the cloth, the way she sighs with relief at night when she lies back down and the layers finally fall away. There, in the hush of darkness, she is only herself again, still bleeding, still alive, still wrapped in cloth and silence, and the private knowledge of what it means to wear this body layer upon layer, day after day, month after month. A bed, in the medieval world, was not a private sanctuary. It was a shared, functional, and often visible piece of furniture built for sleep, but also for labor, for birth, for sickness, for death. In noble houses, it might be ornate, carved with symbols of piety or heraldry. In the homes of the poor, it was simpler: wooden slats, straw, linen, and hope. But for a woman, especially one bleeding the bed, was also a battlefield, a site of quiet strategy, of defense, of preservation, because to stain the bed was not simply inconvenient. It was dangerous. Let us begin with what the bed was made of. For most medieval women, a bed was not a mattress in the modern sense. It was a structurea wooden frame, often rough and creaking with age. Upon this frame was laid a bed sack, a large cloth casing filled with straw, reeds, wool, or sometimes dried leaves. This was known as a palliasse. The stuffing had to be changed regularly, not for comfort, but to avoid pest lice, fleas, and worse. Straw beds could not be washed. If blood soaked through, the damage was permanent. So the first strategy was layering. On top of the palliasse, a woman would lay sheets if she had them. Linen was precious. A single sheet could cost more than a cow. Many poor families owned only one or two, and they were passed down like heirlooms. For women bleeding, the aim was not to protect herself, but to protect the sheet. She would place between her body and the bed a sacrificial layer pad made of worn fabric, moss, or animal hair. Some used old garments, torn into squares and doubled over. Others used lamb's wool or scraps of felt, stitched together into makeshift sanitary cloths. These were washed and reused, but when too stained, they were burned or buried. Next came the bed garda protective cloth, or hide, placed directly beneath her. This could be a square of oiled leather, a layer of felted wool piece of sheepskin, fleece, side up, or, in wealthier households, a waxed linen undercloth designed specifically for this purpose. She might position it under her hips before bed, careful to smooth it flat, to avoid creases that could trap moisture or betray stains in the morning. She might fold it in thirds to absorb more fluid. She might keep a second one nearby to swap in during the night. And then there was the question of position. Some women learned to sleep on their side, knees together, unmoving. Others curled into themselves, trying to create a dam with flesh and tension. It rarely worked. Blood is patient. It finds a way. In noble households, the solutions were more elaborate. A lady of means might sleep on a feather mattress with a set of fine linens. But even then, during her courses, the lower half of the bed would be covered in additional cloths, sometimes embroidered, sometimes darkly dyed, always temporary. Some used specially made bed napkins, small linens, designed to catch bodily fluids. A few even owned monthly sheets darker linens rotated in only during their bleeding days, easier to launder and less likely to stain. Servants were trained to change them discreetly. The chambermaid would carry them to the back courtyard and scrub them in lye water, eyes down, lips sealed. To speak of the stain was to speak of the woman, and that was forbidden. But what of the poor? The peasant woman living in a one-room cottage with her husband, her children, perhaps even a pig or goat had no spare sheets, no oiled linen, no servant hands. So she did what women have always done. She adapted. She slept on extra skirts, folded and placed beneath her. She tucked straw mats under the sheet, knowing they could be burned if ruined. Some used wooden bedboards, flat planks set beneath the hips, to keep fluids from soaking too deep. Others layered old sacks beneath the blanket, stuffed with rags that could be pulled out and replaced if needed. And some, especially during heavy flow, chose not to sleep at all. Instead, they sat upright beside the fire, wrapped in shawls, letting the blood fall freely onto cloth laid across a stool or basin. This was the most effective way to avoid staining the bed, but it came at a price. Sleep, warmth, privacy. Still, they endured it, because to wake in blood was to face questions from a husband, from a mother-in-law, from a priest. The bed, too, became a symbol. A woman who managed her bleeding well was considered clean, capable, and even virtuous. A woman who stained the bed was said to lack discipline or worse, to be inviting the devil into her house. These beliefs were not universal, but they were powerful. Some texts warned that menstrual blood could wither crops, spoil milk, or even kill bees. To let it touch the sleeping place, especially the conjugal bed, was to risk spiritual and physical contamination, so the bed became a space of vigilance. Sometimes, despite every effort, the blood would win. There would be a mark, a scent, a dampness that could not be denied. And then the cleanup began. Cold water, never warm it, sets the stain. Ash soap, made from lye and fat. Stone basins in the yard, hands red from scrubbing. Linen hung behind barns, hidden from view. If a stain remained, it might be patched, covered with embroidery, or folded inward, or turned to face the wall. If the mattress was spoiled, some women flipped it, others restuffed it, some burned it altogether, because no matter how small, a blood stain on the bed was never just a stain. It was a message, a question, a risk. And yet, in all this silence, there was skill. The layering, the folding, the washing, the hiding, these were acts of care, of survival. They turned the bed, supposedly a passive thing, into a site of constant labor, a place where every night required planning, where the body's natural rhythm met the world's refusal to see it. A woman's bed told her story, not in words, but in the layers beneath her, and the ones she stripped away in the dark. The blood was one thing, the stain was another, but the water was everything. In a world where no tap could be turned, where no warm stream waited behind a wall of porcelain and tile, washing was not a convenience. It was a task, an ordeal, a ritual wrapped in cold mornings, cracked knuckles, and quiet shame. And for the medieval woman, especially during her bleeding days, washing was also a matter of secrecy. Because it was not just linen she scrubbed. It was suspicion. It was superstition. It was the need to erase as fully as possible the evidence of what her body had done. She begins early. The dawn sky is pale and sullen. A gray mist clings low to the fields. She carries a bundle beneath her apron, a few cloths folded tightly, tied with rough string, stiff from dried blood, heavy with what must not be seen. She walks to the washing place. It may be a river, a stream, or simply a wooden tub beside the cottage. In some towns, there is a shared wash house, a place where women gather to beat linen on flat stones. But not for this. Never for this. Menstrual cloths are not washed in public. They are rinsed in secret, behind hedges or downriver, where the water runs faster. Even among women, such things are handled alone. She crouches at the bank, knees pressed into the damp earth. The cloths are unwrapped. She inspects them quietly, carefully choosing the worst-stained one first. The blood has dried to a deep brown. It clings to the fabric like rust. If not treated soon, the stain will become permanent. But she knows the trick. Cold water only. Never warm warmth cooks the blood into the fibers. She dips the cloth, swirls it gently. The water clouds into a soft red mist, like smoke beneath the surface. She does not look away. She takes ash, soap, made it homely from burnt wood mixed with animal fat. It burns if it touches open skin. It stings the eyes. But it cleans. She rubs it in, presses her thumbs along the fold, works the fabric against itself, slow and firm, back and forth, back and forth. There is no privacy, not truly. A bird rustles in the branches. A man with a cart may pass along the nearby path. The wind carries voices from the field. She listens for them all, head down, hands moving. Sometimes, when the blood won't come out, she adds vinegar, if she has it, or salt, or old urine eyes, urine left to ferment in a pot behind the barn, sharp, acrid, and strangely effective. It smells, but it works. She scrubs and rinses and scrubs again until the cloth is clean enough, until the stain fades to something more like shadow than wound. She wrings the fabric out with both hands, water streaming down her forearms. Her fingers are red, numb from cold. But she does not stop. Each cloth must be done. Some women use a stick or board to beat the cloth against. Others carry small wooden paddles, carved smooth from years of use. She uses her palms. She presses the fabric between stones. She lets the water do what it can, and then she lifts the wet cloths, folds them loosely, and returns home. But her work is not done. Now, the drying. You cannot dry menstrual cloths like you dry other things. You cannot hang them from the line beside shirts and baby blankets. You cannot leave them in the sun outside your door. You cannot risk a neighbor's eye, a priest's frown, a question asked by the wrong mouth. So you hide them, behind the stable, inside the chimney, beneath the thatch eaves of the house. Some women string a private line in the woods, between trees, known only to them. There, the cloths sway gently in the breeze, dark, wet, and utterly ordinary yet never spoken of. Others dry them near the hearth, tucked behind a screen or pot, close enough to the fire to dry by nightfall, far enough to avoid notice. Some sprinkle herbs on the damp cloth, lavender, thyme, pennyroyalto, disguise any lingering scent, not because it smells terrible, but because it smells like her, and that is enough to make her uneasy. In wealthier homes, there is more distance. A noblewoman does not wash her own clothes. She gives them to a maid, who washes them in designated tubs, sometimes with imported soap made from olive oil and ashes. The maid knows not to ask, knows not to speak, knows that the sheets from that week go into a different pile, to be scalded in boiling water and hung behind the herb garden where no gentleman ever walks. But even wealth cannot remove the stain entirely. Even the lady flinches when the maid lingers too long. Even she wonders whether the cloth will dry in time, whether the blood will ever fully fade, whether the silence, too, might one day unravel. Then there are the winters. In cold months, water freezes in the buckets. The stream turns sluggish. Your hands crack open from the cold. And soap burns the raw places. Still, you must wash. If the cloths are not cleaned, they stiffen. If not dried, they sour. And if blood dries into the weave too often, the cloth becomes unusable, and cloth, in any form, is not easily replaced. So you sit near the fire, you warm the water in a kettle, you scrub with frozen hands while your children sleep, and you dry the cloth by holding it near your own body, hidden beneath your apron, letting your skin do what the sun cannot. There is something sacred in the routine, not holy in the way men mean it, not divine like the relics in the cathedral, but sacred in its quiet persistence, in every woman who has ever knelt by water to wash away her blood, in every hand that has wrung a cloth, in every fire that has warmed it, dry. There is no hymn for this work, no praise, no record, but it is done again and again, month after month, generation after generation. And in that rhythm, that soaking, scrubbing, wringing, hiding, there is a kind of devotion, not to shame, not to silence, but to survival, to dignity, to the small, invisible labors that let the world go on. Chapter 5. The role of herbs and superstitions long before the word menstruation entered polite vocabulary, before gynecology became science, before pain relief came in tablets wrapped in foil. There were women, and there were plants, and between them a silent pact, made not in temples, but in kitchens, not with laws, but with hands gathering, boiling, steeping, whispering. In the quiet corners of medieval life, herbs were not flavor. They were medicine, magic, and sometimes mercy. The blood came, as it always did, and when it came with pain, when it clutched the lower belly like a wolf's jaw, when it turned sleep into tossing and breath into gasps, women turned to the earth. Because the church had no answers, because the men had no language, because silence offered no relief. But the wild did, and so they went to it. She wakes before light, again, her belly tight with cramps, her thighs sore. She lifts the blanket, checks the cloth. Then, barefoot and half-dressed, she steps out into the morning dew. She walks toward the garden. Not the herb bed behind the chapel where only the monks may tend, but the wild border where women plant things not written in scripture. There, she gathers, mugwort, the moon herb, sacred to Artemis and feared by priests' yarrow, whose feathery leaves bleed when cut, as she does pennyroyal, sweet-smelling but bitter, used to calm, painer, end pregnancies. Sage not just for meat, but for memory, for balance, for blood. She knows which leaf to pick, which root to dry, which flower to pluck only after dusk. She does not call herself a healer. She is just a woman. But she remembers what her mother told her, and what her mother's mother once said while folding the cloths behind a curtain. In some villages, women brew moon tea-herbal infusions drunk during their bleeding days. They steep dried herbs in earthen pots. mugwort and rosemary, fennel and mint. They sip slowly, the heat loosening the knots in their bellies. The bitterness reminds them that healing is not always sweet. Some add a touch of honey to soften the taste. Others drink it straight, eyes closed, breath deep. The recipes vary by region, by season, by secret. No two women bleed the same. No two herbs answer the same way. But they try, because it's better than nothing, better than pretending the pain is not real. Beyond relief, there are protections. Many believed that menstruation opened the body to spirits, that a woman bleeding was porous, vulnerable, exposed. So they warded themselves with charms. Sprigs of rue tied at the waist-a pouch of salt, sewn into the hem of a chemise ribbon, soaked in basil oil, tied around the wrist or, more rarely, a dried toad's foot, hung around the neck to confuse demons. These were not decorations. They were armor. Against what? Sometimes disease, sometimes gossip, sometimes the simple terror of being seen, because a woman's blood was feared, and what is feared is often punished. The church had its own view. In sermons and texts, menstrual blood was often called impure, a result of Eve's fall. Some wrote, women on their courses were instructed not to enter the altar, not to touch holy relics, not to bake the communion host. Some monks wrote treatises explaining how blood weakened the soul, how it disrupted male purity, how it was a mark of the flesh triumphing over the spirit. But the midwives, the herbalists, the mothers, they knew differently. They knew the blood came like the tides, that it had rhythm, that it foretold fertility and life and ending, and that it came with pain deserving of more than prayer. So they made space. In cellars and forests and back kitchens, they passed down what could not be written. There were superstitions, of course. Some believed menstrual blood could wilt flowers or sour milk, that if it touched the soil, crops would fail, that a man who lay with a bleeding woman would become ill or sterile. These ideas spread faster than facts, but so too did the counter-traditions. In some regions, menstrual blood was used as a protection, charms mirrored on doorways to ward off evil. Some healers mixed it with red wine and herbs to bind the womb or break fevers. In older pagan communities, it was believed to be life force, a powerful ingredient in fertility spells or agricultural rites. The line between medicine and magic was not a line at all. It was a weaving, and women held the thread. Sometimes the herbs weren't enough, the pain too strong, the bleeding too heavy. Then came the remedies whispered only behind closed doors, a tea brewed too long, a root left in water overnight, a powder folded into a cake. These were abortifacient substances taken to bring on bleeding, used when a period was late, used when no baby was wanted, used when a woman had no choice. Many of these herbs were the same: pennyroyal blue, cohosh tansy ergot fungus, which grew on rye and made hands tremble and visions swirl, dangerous, often, sometimes fatal. But they were all that stood between a woman and another mouth to feed, and sometimes that was the only medicine that mattered. The church condemned such practices. So did husbands and laws and village councils. But the herbs still grew, and the women still gathered, not out of rebellion, but out of need. They whispered the names to daughters, drew them in the margins of cookbooks, sang them into lullabies. Not every woman was an herbalist, but nearly every woman knew one, or remembered one, or carried a leaf pressed into a prayer book, just in case. And then there were the dreams. Some said that during the bleeding days, a woman could see visions more clearly, that the veil between worlds thinned, that herbs gathered then were more powerful, that a bleeding woman's touch could curse or bless. These beliefs lived side by side with shame, with washing and hiding and silence. But they lived, which means something, because superstition is not only fear, it is also memory, a record kept in the shadows when the light refuses to see, and when no one else will speak of your pain. Superstition may be the only voice that believes you. She sits by the hearth, later, sipping her mugwort tea. Outside, the wind blows. The house is asleep. The cloth she wore that day dries behind a clay pot. She feels the ache fading, gently, like the tide going out. She smells time on her fingers, and though she would never call it magic, something in her settles. Not cured, but heard, by the roots, by the leaves, by the long, patient knowledge that lives in soil. And when she sleeps, she dreams not of saints or relics, but of tall green stalks reaching skyward, of flowers that open, even in silence. There were no ceremonies, no scrolls of instruction, no feast days or saints to commemorate it. But every woman, when the time came, was initiated, not into a religion, but into a rhythm, a knowledge, a quiet, shared understanding passed not by word, but by cloth. It began always with confusion, a stain in the undergarment, a cramp like no other, the warm, wet shock of becoming something new and not knowing its name. And then fear, because no one had spoken of it, not plainly, not clearly, not in ways that prepared her, only hints. One day you'll understand. You'll be a woman soon. Watch your linens. So the first blood came in silence, and she thought herself broken, or dying, or cursed, until someone told her the truth. Maybe it was her mother, maybe a sister, maybe the baker's wife, who noticed the way she walked stiffly, clutching her apron tighter than usual. Someone pulled her astronaut into a grand hall, but into a pantry, a shed, a back garden, and said quietly, "It started, hasn't it? No need to name it. They never did." The older woman would reach into a drawer or a basket, produce a cloth, a belt, a pouch of herbs. She would explain gently, but not without bluntness, what the girl must do, how to wear the cloth, where to dry it, how to hide the stains, and most of all, who not to tell. Not the boys, not the priest, not the teacher, not even, sometimes, her own father. It was a strange kind of welcome, not joyous, not warm, but real, because now she belonged to a secret order, a sisterhood not written in any charter, but stitched into linens, etched into pain, woven into nights where she sat with a hot stone pressed to her belly and whispered curses no one would hear. And in this, she was not alone. There were no open conversations, no long discussions over wine or embroidery. Instead, there were glances, a nod across a market stall, a hand briefly resting on a shoulder, a fresh cloth quietly passed under the table. Sometimes that was enough, because each woman knew what it was to sit through Mass while blood ran between her legs, knew what it was to fear a stain on a borrowed chair, knew the strange shame of something so natural it could tear you apart, yet must never be seen. Women helped each other covertly, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. An older neighbor might offer a pot of balm. A midwife might suggest tying wool around the hips just so. A friend might distract the boys while you slipped away to change your cloth. In wealthier homes, the ladies in waiting handled it all, changing linens discreetly, heating water, bringing laundered cloths wrapped in lavender leaves. They would say nothing, only bow and move on. Even among queens, the sisterhood held. A noblewoman might bleed in silk sheets, but still feel the same ache, still glance behind her to check the bench, still thank her handmaid with a quiet nod that said, "You understand." There were tragedies. Of course there were. Young girls who bled too much and told no one, fearing sin more than sickness. Women whose cloths were discovered and mocked, accused of witchcraft, beaten, banished. But even then, there were others. Hands that reached for them when no one else dared. Women who whispered through walls, passed cloths through holes in fences, left herbs on doorsteps. Sisterhood was not always loud, but it was persistent. Sometimes it took the form of story, told by candlelight while spinning wool, tales of a grandmother who bled for 2 weeks straight and lived, of a woman whose monthly pain stopped only after eating boiled nettles, of a Santunamda who walked through the forest with blood on her thighs and was kissed by a fox, not judged. These stories weren't in books. They changed from village to village, but they served their purpose to say, "You are not cursed. You are not alone. You are not wrong." There were rituals, too improvised and personal. A girl might bury her first stained cloth beneath a tree to give it back to the earth. She might keep a pouch of lavender under her pillow to sleep easier during bleeding nights. She might write her worries on scraps of parchment and burn them during her cycle's first evening. watching the ash drift like worry unspoken. None of this was official, but all of it mattered. Because when the world gives you no script for your pain, you write your own, even if only in gestures. The cloths were passed down, sometimes literally. Mothers would fold and hand their daughters a stack of clean, soft rags already worn thin from years of use. Other times, symbolically, knowledge passed not in words, but in motion, how to rinse, how to fold, how to mask the smell with thyme and rosemary. A girl might never hear her mother say, period, but she would know what the soaked basin meant. She would remember the gentle way her mother added salt, and the way she said, "You'll know when it's your time." In convents, the sisterhood took a different shape. Nuns bled, too. Though cloistered and chaste, their bodies followed the same rhythm. And though silence was their vow, they developed their own codes. A red cloth hung near the door, a special laundry rotation, an understanding that on certain days, prayers might be said sitting rather than kneeling. They never spoke of it aloud, but they made space, and sometimes that is the holiest thing a body can be given. And then there were friends, 2 girls walking to the river with bundles hidden in baskets, giggling not out of joy but out of tension. One saying, "Mine started yesterday." The other whispering, "I thought I was dying." And then silence, but it was enough. They'd sit beside the stream, washing their cloths, talking about anything else, cows, shoes, the weather, but the water between them carried more than soap. It carried the feeling that someone else knew, someone else bled, someone else was real. This sisterhood had no leaders, no rules, no names, but it stretched across miles and centuries, from the noble hall to the dirt floor cottage, from the nunnery to the tavern, from the mothers to the daughters to the friends who never said what they meant, but always meant what they did. And in that unspoken union, there was protection, there was memory, there was grace, not given from above, but born in the hands of women who folded, bled, washed, shared, and folded again. And though history forgets these rituals, we must not, because they were real, they were ordinary, they were everything. The room is quiet now. Only the soft crackle of the hearth remains. The candle has burned low, wax curling at its base like a melted clock. She lies in bed, eyes open, though she is not quite awake, nor quite asleep. The cloth between her legs is warm, but dry for now. The ache in her lower back has dulled to a distant throb, like thunder rumbling across a far-off field. Outside the wooden shutters, the wind stirs gently. Not a storm, just enough to remind her that the world is still turning. Another night, another cycle, another page in the unwritten calendar she keeps not on parchment, but in the folds of memory, pain, and silence. She has been bleeding like this for over 20 years, and in all those years, she has stained many things. Chemises, aprons, sheets, mattresses, once, even a church pew. That day, she burned the cloth, scrubbed her hands raw, did not speak to anyone for the rest of the week, but the memory still lingers. Not in Chaminade anymore, but in recognition. Because blood leaves a mark? Yes. But time wears it down, and so do women. She remembers the first cloth her mother gave her, frayed edges, 3 patches, a faint scent of thyme, and something older like smoke and bread crust. She didn't understand it at the time, just clutched it beneath her skirt and hoped no one would notice the way she walked, stiff and awkward. Hoped no one would smell the blood or the fear. Now, years later, she has her own daughter, 10 summers old, not yet bleeding, but soon, and she wonders, will I tell her? Or will I do what was done to wait until it comes, then offer the cloth as if it were a consolation for her terror? She hopes not. She hopes to do better. But hopes are fragile things, and tradition is a strong current, pulling you back when you think you've stepped ashore. She rises from the bed, slow and steady. The floor is cold. She steps lightly, careful not to wake the baby, bundled in the corner by the hearth. She unwraps the soiled cloth, folds it neatly, ties it in a square of darker, wooler nightcloths, are always black or brown, easier to disguise. She does not flinch at the stain. She has seen worse. She sets the bundle near the door. Tomorrow, before the sun is fully up, she will take it to the stream behind the fields. Not the main one, where the boys swim. The narrow one, hidden by reeds and wild onions. The one women know. There, she will kneel and wash and rinse and press the blood from the cloth over and over until the water runs clear. Or clear enough. The stain never disappears entirely. But it fades. And that is enough, because not all stains are meant to be erased. Some are meant to be witnessed, to be softened, by time but never forgotten. She will dry the cloth behind the oven. Sprinkle it with mint leaves, not for the smell, but for the memory. Her mother used mint, so she does. 2. She will fold it again, place it at the bottom of her chest beneath the winter scarves, and wait until next month. This cycle, she knows, is not eternal. There will come a day soon, perhaps when the blood will not arrive. No cramps, no cloths, no need to walk to the stream. The first time it happens, she will be relieved. The second time, she will be confused. The third, afraid. But eventually, she will know. The cycle has ended. The cloths may be burned, or buried, or given to a younger woman in the village gift wrapped in wool and silence. The bed will no longer need guarding. The mattress will remain unstained, the undergarments unmarked, and yet she may find herself lying awake at night, still folding the blanket just so, still tucking cloth beneath her hips, just in case. Because habits don't vanish when blood does, and rituals, once stitched into the body, rarely unravel all at once. She will carry the memory of it, the warmth, the ache, the dark threads woven through her youth and middle years, the way women used to glance at her and nod, and the way she now nods at them. Because the sisterhood does not end with the bleeding. It stretches on into the menopause, into the widowhood, into the stories told by the fire when young girls ask, "Did it hurt? What did you do?" And she will smile, slow and quiet. "We managed," she will say, "with cloth, with herbs, with one another." A few years from now, her daughter will wake her in the night. There will be blood on the sheet, and fear in her eyes. And the mother who once bled through sermons, through hayfields, through childbirth will rise without a word. Fetch the dark cloth, warm water, a sprig of thyme, and sit beside the girl, stroking her hair, whispering, "You're not broken. It's just your body telling its story." The girl won't understand, not yet, but she will remember the warmth of the hand, the steam of the water, the way the cloth was folded and passed to her like something sacred. And one day, she too will repeat the ritual, not with pride perhaps, but with grace, and in doing so, the story continues, blood stains, yes, but it also binds. It marks us, tracks us, tethers us to one another in ways words cannot. But stains fade with washing, with time, with the gentle wear of years. And though the world may never build monuments to the cloths we washed, the pain we bore, the sisterhood we upheld in silence, we remember. And that is enough. The bed is quiet now, the fire low, the cloth folded, and somewhere in the darkness, a mother closes her eyes and rests, not because the work is done, but because it has been shared.